All right, everybody, buckle up because we are diving headfirst into some seriously wild economic waters.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a roller coaster ride lately, hasn't it? With all this talk about tariffs and trade wars and, frankly, a whole lot of economic jargon that leaves most of us scratching our heads.
Exactly. And, we're all about cutting through the noise here and getting to the heart of the matter. So today we're tackling a claim that's been making waves, a claim that suggests these new Liberation Day tariffs announced back on April 2nd might just be based on a rather unique interpretation of how economics actually works.
Unique is one way to put it. Some are even calling it a bizarre misinterpretation of one statistic. And get this, there's even speculation that AI chatbots might have inadvertently played a role in shaping this whole thing.
AI chatbots shaping global trade policy. Now, that's a headline I didn't expect to see. But hey, this is 2025, anything's possible, right? We've got a mountain of sources to sift through today. Articles from Time, University of Chicago News, Cípico Texto, Futurism, the Tax Foundation, The Verge Vox, and even CBS News. So yeah, we've done our homework.
We've got the economic deep dive kit ready to go.
Exactly. So our mission today is to untangle this economic knot and figure out what these Liberation Day tariffs are all about. What are you trying to achieve? What kind of impact could they have on, your wallet, your job, the global economy? And perhaps most importantly, is the math behind these tariffs even sound? Or are we looking at a policy built on a foundation of economic wobbly bits?
Wobbly bits indeed. So let's break it down, shall we? What exactly are these tariffs and how do they actually work?
All right, let's start with the name itself, Liberation Day. It sounds kind of dramatic, doesn't it? Like something out of a superhero movie?
It certainly grabs your attention.
It does. So April 2nd, that's when this whole thing kicked off. And there are a couple of main pieces to this tariff puzzle. First, you've got these things called reciprocal tariffs. Now, on the surface, it sounds almost fair, right? The U.S. will tax goods coming in from another country at the same rate that country taxes American goods going out, tit for tat. You tax us, we tax you.
Yeah. It has a certain intuitive appeal, a sense of fairness. But of course, the devil is always in the details. And the big question here is, how are these reciprocal rates actually being determined?
Yeah, that's where things start to get a little murky. Because on top of these reciprocal tariffs, there's also this blanket 10% tariff being slapped on pretty much everything coming into the U.S. This is in addition to those reciprocal tariffs, so it's not a case of either, it's both.
Which means, depending on the country and the specific goods we're talking about, some of these tariffs could end up being pretty hefty.
Exactly. And then there's this whole focus on the trade deficit. The administration has made it clear that these tariffs are specifically designed to eliminate the U.S. goods trade deficit with certain countries. So if a country sells a lot more stuff to the U.S. than we sell to them, think China, Vietnam, Bangladesh, they're looking at potentially much higher tariff rates. Some reports even put these rates in the 34% to 46% range.
It's important to note the legal tools the administration is using to justify these sweeping changes. They're invoking the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, and Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act. These acts give the president significant power to impose tariffs in certain circumstances. Like if there's a perceived threat to national security or economic stability, it essentially allows them to bypass the usual trade negotiation processes.
Right, so they're pulling out the big guns here. And what are their stated goals? Well, they're aiming high, folks. More jobs here in the U.S., bringing companies back home, putting American workers first, the classic America First agenda. They also want to boost U.S. competitiveness globally, shrink that stubborn trade deficit, and strengthen both our economic and national security. Oh, and there's even been talk of using the money generated by these tariffs to help offset some of those tax cuts for the wealthy. Kind of like robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Ambitious goals indeed. But the big question is, are these tariffs the right tool for the job? And what about the potential downsides?
And that brings us to the part that's really raising eyebrows, the whole bizarre misinterpretation claim. Reports are suggesting that the method being used to calculate these tariff rates is, let's just say it's leaving economists scratching their heads.
Extraordinary nonsense was how one economist described it, and that's a quote that really sticks with you. The claim is that the tariff rate for a particular country is being calculated by taking the trade deficit the U.S. has, with that country dividing that by the total value of goods imported from that country, and then dividing that result by 2.
Dividing by 2, just like that. It sounds almost too simple, doesn't it? Like they're trying to solve a complex equation by, just rounding down to the nearest whole number.
It does raise questions about the sophistication of the economic modeling being used. And here's where things get even more interesting. There's speculation that AI chatbots might have actually played a role in this whole calculation method.
AI chatbots. This is where we enter the twilight zone, right? But seriously, multiple reports have highlighted that when you ask AI chatbots like ChatGPT, Gemini, Grok, and Claude for a simple way to calculate tariffs to balance trade deficits, they tend to come up with a very similar formula to divide the trade deficit by the total value of imports. Some even go so far as to suggest having that figure to get a reasonable tariff, which sounds an awful lot like this discounted reciprocal tariff idea we're talking about.
It's a fascinating, if somewhat unsettling thought that AI might be influencing global economic policy, even if unintentionally. And the irony is that even ChatGPT itself reportedly warned that its method ignores the complexities of international trade.
So the AI is smarter than the policymakers. Maybe we should just let the robots run things from now on.
I'm not sure I'm ready to hand over the reins just yet. But it does highlight the dangers of relying on overly simplistic solutions to complex problems. These AI-generated calculations might seem straightforward, but they completely overlook crucial factors like demand elasticity, which basically means how much demand for a product changes when its price goes up or down. They also ignore the potential for retaliation from other countries and the intricate web of global supply chains. It's like trying to fix a leaky faucet by just painting over it.
A nice visual there. So we've got this questionable calculation method, potentially inspired by AI chatbots, and then there's this whole idea that no trade equals no deficit, which just doesn't make sense logically. If the US doesn't trade much with a country, the trade deficit will naturally be small, right? That doesn't mean the country isn't engaging in unfair trade practices or that there aren't other economic imbalances at play. But under this logic, they'd get off scot-free with a tiny tariff.
It's a very narrow and arguably flawed way of looking at things. It ignores the bigger picture and the underlying reasons for those trade deficits.
So the White House did release their own formula for how they calculated these tariffs. But some analysts have pointed out that it looks suspiciously similar to just a dressed-up version of that overly simplistic method we were just talking about. So whether it came from a chatbot or just from a similar line of thinking, the calculation method itself is definitely raising red flags.
And for good reason. Because if the math is wrong, the economic consequences can be pretty severe. So let's talk about what those consequences might be for you, the average person out there trying to make ends meet.
Right, because at the end of the day, this all boils down to how much money you have in your pocket and what you can buy with it. So what happens when you start slapping tariffs on all sorts of imported goods? Well, the first and most obvious impact is higher prices.
Exactly. Tariffs are essentially a tax on imported goods, and businesses don't usually absorb those costs. They pass them along to consumers. So if a store has to pay more to import a product, guess what? You're going to see that extra cost reflected in the price tag when you go to buy it.
It's like a hidden tax. It's not as obvious as, say, income tax or sales tax, but it hits your wallet just the same. And we're not talking about small price increases here. We're talking about potential hikes of 10%, 20%, even 40% on everyday items like electronics, clothing, cars, and yes, even food.
It's a regressive tax, which means it disproportionately affects lower and middle income households because they spend a larger percentage of their income on these essential goods.
Right. So we're talking about things like iPhones getting more expensive, clothes getting more expensive, that new car you've been saving up for suddenly costing thousands of dollars more. And don't even get me started on avocados. Apparently about 90% of avocados consumed in the US come from Mexico. So get ready to pay a lot more for that guacamole.
And those price increases are just the tip of the iceberg. The broader U.S. economy could also take a hit. Some experts are predicting a reduction in U.S. GDP as a result of these tariffs.
Yeah.
And if other countries retaliate, which they almost certainly will, that economic pain could be even worse.
Retaliation is a key point here. Because it's not just about the U.S. imposing tariffs on other countries. They're going to hit back with tariffs of their own. So American businesses that export goods overseas are also going to face higher costs and reduced demand. And that could lead to job losses here in the U.S.
It's a classic lose-lose scenario. And then you've got the looming threat of inflation and potentially even a recession. Tariffs can push prices up, which fuels inflation. And if businesses start cutting back on investment and hiring because of all this uncertainty, that can slow down economic growth and potentially tip us into a recession.
So we could end up with this nasty combination of high prices, slow growth, and rising unemployment. Not exactly a recipe for economic prosperity.
And let's not forget about global supply chains. Many industries rely on parts and components that are sourced from all over the world. These tariffs can disrupt those delicately balanced supply chains, leading to delays, shortages, and increased costs for businesses, which again gets passed along to consumers in the form of higher prices.
It's like a domino effect. One thing leads to another, and before you know it, the whole system is out of whack. And the irony is that these tariffs might not even achieve their stated goal of reducing the trade deficit.
That's right. While tariffs can reduce imports, they can also lead to a decrease in exports. So the trade deficit might not change that much in the long run, while the overall economy suffers. It's like trying to fix a broken leg with a Band-Aid. It might cover up the problem temporarily, but it's not going to actually heal the bone.
So we're essentially conducting a massive economic experiment here with potentially disastrous consequences. And economists keep pointing to historical examples as warnings, like the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930, which is widely believed to have made the Great Depression even worse.
History has shown us time and again that protectionist trade policies like these rarely achieve their intended goals and often end up causing more harm than good.
So let's be clear about who's actually going to pay the price for these tariffs. It's not going to be those foreign countries like some people might claim. The burden is going to fall squarely on the shoulders of American consumers.
Studies have shown that over 90% of the costs associated with tariffs are passed on to consumers through higher prices. So while the political rhetoric might focus on making other countries pay, the reality is that it's you and me who will be footing the bill.
It's like a hidden tax that we all have to pay.
Yeah.
And lower income families are going to be hit the hardest because they spend a larger portion of their income on essential goods that are likely to be affected by these tariffs.
It's a classic case of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer.
So let's do a quick rundown of how different sectors and countries might be impacted by these tariffs. China, as a major target of these tariffs, is facing some pretty steep rates on many of its goods. We're talking about electronics, apparel, furniture, toys, you name it. And since China is a major supplier of so many products we buy, those price increases are going to be felt across the board.
Mexico and Canada, our neighbors and close trading partners, are also facing tariffs despite being part of the USMCA trade agreement. So get ready for more expensive avocados and potentially higher prices for cars as well, because the auto industry relies heavily on cross-border supply chains.
Europe isn't escaping unscathed either. Wine, spirits, cheese, all those European delicacies could be getting pricier. And even Swiss watches are being targeted. So if you've been saving up for a Rolex, you might want to start saving a little more aggressively.
And it's not just those big players. Countries in Asia, Latin America, Africa, they're all going to be affected by these tariffs in one way or another. It's a truly global web of potential economic disruption.
And the biggest wild card in all of this is uncertainty. Businesses hate uncertainty. Consumers hate uncertainty. It makes it impossible to plan for the future. And when people are uncertain, they tend to hold back on spending and investing, which can further slow down the economy.
Uncertainty is like a poison to the economic system. It breeds fear and hesitation, which can lead to a self-fulfilling prophecy of decline.
So we've got economists out there calling this whole situation a prelude to a global trade war and saying that there's no economic rationale for these tariffs. Some are even suggesting that this is exactly what the dumbest kid in the class would do.
Strong words, but they reflect the level of concern among experts about the potential consequences of these policies.
The real worry is that these tariffs could end up isolating American companies and hindering innovation. We live in a globalized world, and trying to cut ourselves off from the rest of the global economy is like trying to breathe underwater. It's not sustainable in the long run.
It's a recipe for economic stagnation.
So to sum it all up, we've got a new tariff structure built on a shaky foundation. A calculation method that even AI chatbots might question, a laundry list of potential negative consequences for American consumers and the U.S. economy as a whole, and a whole lot of uncertainty about what the future holds.
It's a complex and potentially dangerous situation that underscores the importance of sound economic policy and a nuanced understanding of global trade dynamics.
So here's a final thought for you to chew on. Given how interconnected the global economy is, what are the long-term implications of a major economic power like the U.S. pursuing this kind of go-it-alone protectionist approach? Are we setting ourselves up for failure? Or is this a bold move that will ultimately make America stronger? It's a question worth pondering as we navigate these uncertain economic waters.
And perhaps a question best pondered with a slightly more expensive cup of coffee, thanks to those tariffs.
Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay curious.
And maybe keep an eye on those AI chatbots just in case they decide to start writing tax policy next.
You never know what the future holds, folks. That's the fun part.
And sometimes the terrifying part.
Exactly. But hey, that's why we're here, to help you make sense of it all.
Until next time.
See ya.